Hello and welcome to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter LeBeau. The continuing saga. How did 3 people in Salisbury survive contamination by a military-grade nerve agent? London has a lot of explaining to do. Also, Nikki Haley goes off the rails again. What exactly is a normal country? CrossTalking, a world in crisis. I'm joined by my guest, Mark Sleboda. He's an international affairs and security analyst. We also have Victor Olevich. He is a political analyst as well as a leading expert at the Center for Actual Politics. And we have Dmitry Babich. He is a political analyst with Sputnik International. Okay, gentlemen, as always, CrossTalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. Victor, let me go to you first here. Using the word saga is an understatement here. Bring us up to speed what's going on with this alleged poisoning incident in the UK.
So what has happened this week? First of all, miraculously, all the so-called victims of this poisoning have come back to almost full health. Sergei Skripal is not only conscious now, not only did he come out of a coma, but he can speak. His daughter, Yulia, is
military-grade contamination.
His daughter, Yulia, is fine and well, doing great.
Military-grade contamination.
She can speak on the phone. She is fine. And the thing is, the fact is that that type of chemical that they accused of Russia of somehow using against Skripal, if that would actually be used, they would never be able not only to come out of a coma, but they would not be alive today. Second of all, the British government denied a visa request from Sergei Skripal's niece to come and visit Sergei Skripal and his daughter in London.
Even though Yulia wanted it.
Yes, and one of the reasons given by the British authorities was that the cousin didn't have enough money. Maybe she would want to stay in Britain.
No, they don't ask that of Polish plumbers,
Of course. And to top it off, to top it off, several hours ago, news came out that the United States is considering taking Sergei Skripal and Yulia Skripal to its witness protection program. So
so an alleged crime happened in the UK, and they're getting witness protection in the United States.
In the U.S. And the reason, the official reason given, is that the United States would be the best place to prevent further assassination attempts against Sergei Skripal.
I think that it's probably the best place. We'll never find out.
Exactly.
We will
That's
never
the whole
hear
point.
from these people, Mark. Do we know that if Sergei and Yulia want to go to the United States, can they be compelled to go to the United States? Will we ever see them in front of a microphone? Will Yulia ever be able to visit her family in Russia again?
So just like Jeremy Corbyn, Peter, the only reason that you would question any of this is because that you are attacking the United Kingdom as part of the Russian spin machine. That is what the British Labour Party leader, Jeremy Corbyn, was accused of doing by the British Foreign Minister, Boris Johnson.
So seeking the truth is not a priority here, right?
Well,
the truth is not of importance here.
I think basically you gave it a wrong name. What happened there was not poisoning. It was an attack against the United Kingdom by the Russian Federation with the use of chemical weapons. And Mark is right. You know, there is a joke making rounds in Russia. You know, Yulia Skripal was questioned by the British police if she noticed anything weird about, before going to the UK. We know one of the versions that the poison was in that buckwheat that was brought to Skripal on his order from Russia. So the police asked him, "Did you notice anything weird?" She said, "Nothing special, just when I went to buy this buckwheat in the nearby store, there was Putin in person selling it to me behind the counter. That was the only weird thing that I noticed." It was kind of strange.
No, they're actually...
But, we can make jokes about that, but the implications of this story are immense, and it is a lack of legitimacy in the British government to tell the truth.
There actually are victims in this saga.
Yes.
First of all, it's the pets. There's a cat that's dead. There's a guinea pig that belonged to Skripal that's dead. But the real victim is the relationship between Russia and the West. And the British authorities have obviously chosen a road of confrontation with Russia. They are willing to go the length to accuse Russia without any evidence, not presenting any evidence on the court in front of the international community, and banking on Russophobia doing the job for them.
So we're foregoing the rule of law, the presumption of innocence before proven guilty, and we're foregoing the right to dissent.
Yeah, it has to be said that the pets died not because of some mysterious nerve agent, but because the British government killed them, cremated them, right? For whatever reason,
starved them to death.
So let's recover. Because we don't have a 15-minute memory here, let's recall that we were told that they were the British soil was attacked by a military-grade nerve agent, a secret Soviet military-grade nerve agent that just happened to be on a British spy drama earlier in the last year. That is 10 times more powerful than VX, military-grade. We were told, the New York Times called it the nerve agent too deadly to use, right? The Telegraph said we should just let them die.
Everybody survives and comes back to life.
But all 3 victims come, right? But we have an explanation for this, because in Politico,
I'm all ears,
Dan Cazzetta, who is purported to be a chemical weapon and security expert, he came up with all kinds of reasons why they could have survived. They could have been wearing gloves, all 3 of them. It could have been raining. It wasn't. They could have washed their hands afterwards. Magically, the nerve agent just disappeared.
This technology is really awesome. I can't kill, okay?
But also, military
is a good motivator for washing your hands often.
The militaries create all different kinds and qualities of nerve agents. So not only did the Russian government commit an attack on a retired, old, swapped spy who had already served time in prison.
And had been squeezed by the FSB, had been squeezed by MI6.
Not only did they kill him with a super secret Soviet nerve agent that would point a glowing trail back to Russia, but they did it with a sub-lethal dose that let all 3 of them survive, too. This is what we are supposed to believe.
But you could just draw the conclusion that this was a publicity stunt to drive a certain agenda.
Well,
and many of those agendas are the failure of the May government to deal with Brexit, the failure of her own policies among the population as far as public opinion polls, and being able to use the tried and honored Russophobia that always does the trick.
We want to talk about a spin machine. Let's talk about the spin machine with Boris Johnson. All right, when he lied,
is he still foreign secretary?
He still is.
Really? How did that happen?
This is the world we live in.
To the public in the world, and saying that it was certainly attributed to Russia by the Portensdown scientists, who then later contradicted this. That was not a lie, though. That was, he misspoke. It was a mistake. He exaggerated slightly. It was an overstatement or a gaffe. Just take your choice. Yeah. That is a spin machine.
No, I'll take he's incompetent.
Well, indeed, the problem was that
at the very least,
when Boris Johnson said that he knew that these weapons were made in Russia and that this was made on President Putin's order, he expressly referred to Downton Laboratory. He said that they told him.
The guy told him, right?
And it was simply just a brutal lie, I would say.
And then they had to delete that tweet.
Yes,
the foreign office had to delete that tweet.
Deleted their own tweet to cover up what they said.
Also, what happened, when they destroyed the animals, when they didn't come to that house for several days because the guinea pigs died of starvation.
Well, you had a police officer standing next to the door for a number of days,
and he never
next to the poisoned knob. Apparently,
I don't know if that is not tampering with the evidence. Then what else is it?
Victor, are we ever going to find out what happened?
Everything,
other than the official version,
everything
of course.
that is secret eventually becomes public knowledge. But when that eventuality will happen, is it 10 years from now? Is it 20 years from now? Is it 50 years from now? Is a big question. There's a little footnote to this. The British are actually saying they never used an antidote to the so-called Novichok.
there is
So they
no-
came, they came back to life
Here's the miracle.
from a
Miraculous.
coma. Miraculous.
You
without
have
an
to
antidote.
have it to find an antidote.
Exactly.
Okay?
Exactly.
Sorry.
That's
Peter.
why they're saying they didn't use the antidote, because if
Sorry.
they, in order to have an antidote, they would have to produce Novichok, and they're claiming they never had it.
Peter, we don't know what happened here, and we may never know, right? Because no real evidence. The only evidence we have is from the outrageous lies of the,
We don't
of the
even
British
know
government.
that
and
there was
Iran.
any poisoning.
The most
Exactly.
credible story I have read, Moon of Alabama blog,
Right.
says that the effects of seafood poisoning act very much like a nerve agent like this. Read it for yourself. It's at least more credible than the British government's version of what happened.
Well, I know what happened because I know what followed. You know, the most important thing about the arson of Reichstag was not who personally, who was the person
It
who
was the
set it on
outcome.
fire.
But who
the
benefited?
outcome, you know, it basically brought Hitler unlimited power back in 1933. In the same way, I don't know exactly what happened in Salisbury. I know the consequences. I know how Russia now, you know, when Russia convened a Security Council meeting of the United Nations, Britain complained that they didn't wait until the results of the investigation. Well, the UK went to the UN Security Council first, even before the police investigation. But in the sphere of public opinion, I think they already lost, because what happened was the rebirth of Soviet political jokes. Now, these jokes are not directed against the government in
That's a
Moscow.
very
They are
interesting
directed
angle.
against the government in America and in Britain. Let me just quote it. You know, the most hilarious one, the most recent one is, you know, Theresa May is reported to be raped in London. So they reported to Putin, and Putin says to the officer who said it, I have only one question. Am I the only suspect? Or is it the whole Russian people?
Peter,
20 seconds.
I think
20 seconds,
the Independent said it best in their editorial. The headline, whether we can prove Moscow's involvement in the Skripal case or not is irrelevant. The poisoning is severing Russians' relations with the West. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Okay, we're going to continue with
matter
this.
who
We're going to go to a
poisoned,
short
actually.
break, gentlemen.
Or
After that
if-
short
if-
break, we'll
if-
continue our discussion on some real news. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing some real news. Okay, gentlemen, I want to finish up on the first block here. You summed it up really well, Mark, at the end of the first part of the program. And I want to ask all three of you, where do we go from here, Mark?
They can't back down from this, right? If they back down from this, the British government would fall. And they can't let that happen, because that would likely mean Jeremy Corbyn's election. And that is what the British deep state and you know, the whole foreign policy elite fear most, is Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party leader, being elected. So they've got to get more outrageous with their lies. And I have a suggestion. The satirical website, The Postillion, headline, British police find Putin's passport at scene of Salisbury poison attack. And, I mean, considering the number of passports that terrorists and everyone else have left laying around scenes
Why
of
not?
crimes, why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Where do we go from here, Victor?
Mark is right. They can't and they will not back down. And one way for them to go forward is another, even more significant, even more dangerous provocation against Russia. So there may be another act that they blame on Russia, whether it's in the United States or in Great Britain. Remember Nikki Haley's words
We're gonna talk
during
about
a
her,
Security
and we're gonna
Council
talk about
resolution,
her.
session, where she said,
Right.
what happens if there is an attack in New York City? They may very well just organize something like that and then blame it on Russia with no evidence at all.
Well, they've proven you can get away with it.
Exactly.
A precedent.
Well, for me, the main problem, the main question is, how will Russia react?
Good.
Until now, Putin has always, in these embarrassing situations for them, he always left the door open for them. He always let them save face. You know, the lies about Iraq, Putin never raised it after the war, right? The attack on Yugoslavia, which was supposed to be justified by at least 100,000 Kosovo Albanians dead, you know, that turned out to be a lie.
Yeah.
They never found the graves, but Russia allowed them to save face and to get out with it. Now, I hope Russia will press on it, because, you know, just like they say, don't let Putin get away with it. Well, Putin has nothing to do with it. But now the question is, will Russia let them get away with it now? If it does, then it will continue. And it's not a problem of interstate relationship. It's a problem of ideological fight now. There is a very aggressive new ideology which unites the United States, the European Union, the UK, and unless it is countered now, it will get more and more absurd.
That's why I introduced this program as a world in crisis here. Nikki Haley's name has already been brought up here. I mean, I obviously like to make fun of her. You know, I've said many times that she has advanced degrees in hillbilly studies. I still believe that. But, you know, she had some very fiery words from a chief diplomat. It's quite scary. Russia will never be America's friend. Moscow can try to behave, quote unquote, like a regular country. But the U.S. will, quote, slap them when we need to. React to that, Victor. That's the chief diplomat from the United States going at the United Nations.
Two things here. First of all, what does she mean by be like a regular country?
Well, that's why I wanted to do this segment.
A regular country is a country that tiptoes to Washington, that follows...
Kowtows.
Yes. That does what Uncle Sam essentially says, what it tells them to do, what it orders them to do, and says thank you.
Like the Netherlands. Russia should be more like the Netherlands.
And of course, Russia has its own domestic and foreign policy, just like China, just like Iran, just like Venezuela or Cuba. It is exactly these countries that have their own view of the world, that have their own foreign domestic policies, that want a friendship with America, but on their own terms, that irritate the American foreign policy establishment so much, from Nikki Haley to John Bolton to Mike Pompeo
we'll
to Donald Trump.
We'll be talking a lot about
yes.
John Bolton on this program here. But, you know, Mark, it's very interesting is that we have another round of sanctions came about. We have this whole affair in the UK. And we have Nikki Haley, we have John Bolton coming into. This seems very well organized to me. And I think that what Dima had to say in the first part of the program is that, you know, now we have a precedent. Now we can see more of these shenanigans being played out to drive a specific agenda.
Yeah, and the latest is with these latest sanctions against Russian oligarchs and companies, as they call them, a handful that they say are close to Putin. First of all, Putin is probably just, and a lot of the Russian people, most of the Russian people, are just saying thank you. Thank you for pressuring and scaring our, oligarchs, such as it is, into repatriating their wealth back to the motherland rather than spending it in New York or London. I mean, we're really happy with that. But, you know, the most hilarious and ironic thing about all of this is that Russia's oligarchs, back in the day when they really existed, were created and celebrated by the Bill Clinton administration in Russia, right? That whole, we got Boris Yeltsin elected, you know.
It goes even further than that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So these latest sanctions really, again, are quite toothless. The intention is that they can force what they call oligarchs to overthrow Putin in a coup. This has been the liberal hope for years, knowing they can't win an election fairly.
So you keep trying a policy. Yeah, that's right. Where you have liberals that can't win elections, and then you double down on policies that don't have any, that do not come to fruition.
Because this is what the foreign policy experts on Russia in the West, who fundamentally misunderstand Russia
all of those
and the Russian social
names
contract,
on the back of a postage stamp.
Putin got rid of the oligarchs and leashed them to the power of the state. That's why there aren't any oligarchs per se, like, say, Jeff Bezos
or like Ukraine.
Or
Mark Zuckerberg.
Or Sheldon Adelson.
Dima. I have a couple of points here. I think that basically the sanctions list that was published today, it is the most extensive in terms of effect, because the really rich people are included. You know, Vekselberg, the head of Renova company, which is huge. You know, Oleg Deripaska, the head of Basel, which is just about all of Russia's metallurgy. But I think the mistake that they're making is that they basically spread this Kremlin list, sanctions list, they have spread it to almost 100% of Russia's rich people. So it looks like class struggle now. If you want to really sow discord between the Russian rich people, then take 50%, impose sanctions on them. Then maybe you will have a split. But the problem is that they impose sanctions on all of them. Why did they do it? Because the American foreign policy is actually fed by profoundly wrong information. There is no such science now as Russian studies. It is all fake. It's all ideologized. The idea that they have is that Russia is run by a bunch of capitalists, tied to the president, and they have no base in society. That looks very much like the Russia of the 90s, which they liked and which they praised. But it doesn't look like Russia today.
It's a reflection very much like them. They're projecting.
In the worldview of the American elites, Russia was bad when it was a monarchy. Russia was bad when it was run by the Bolsheviks and the communists, and Russia is bad when it's run by capitalists. So the conclusion from this is that it doesn't matter who Russia is run by, but Russia itself is bad.
But Russia was good when it was disintegrating.
When it was weak.
Gorbachev,
I've
in
often
1917,
thought, Mark, is that the foreign policy lead in the West, they project all of their real sins projected upon Russia. Russia is, they say, a normal country. What kind of normal country is in 7 major conflicts around the world without any kind of international mandate, breaking international law on a regular basis,
with 1,000 military bases?
Well, the Americans don't consider themselves to be a normal country. They consider themselves to be an exceptional country. A single exceptional country, and all the rest must listen and abide.
The U.S. doesn't want Russia to be like them. Oh, God forbid, they want Russia to be like the Netherlands. Sorry, Netherlands.
Well, I think they want Russia to
Leave them alone.
be like Ukraine, because
exactly, there's a better analogy.
Even in the Netherlands, last week you had the parliament castigating the anti-Russian propaganda group called EU versus Disinfo. For what? For attacking the Dutch media, for publishing news from Russia, calling it fake news. The Dutch parliament rebelled, and they said that these people from basically a government-financed EU versus Disinfo, that they have no right to pass a judgment on what the Dutch media is reporting, whether it's fake news or not. So Netherlands is too good, Ukraine, or maybe Moldova, or maybe Poland. That would be the right way for Russia in their minds. But
Dima,
they will.
It's never going to happen.
Yes,
it's never going to happen. Why do they keep trying it?
Nikki Haley said, Russia will never be America's friends, and we will have to slap them around when it's needed.
Victor,
Russian,
Dima,
right?
And
but the United States,
that's what's going to happen.
The United States and Russia don't have to be friends.
Exactly.
They don't have to be friends, but they don't have to be enemies either. Okay.
Absolutely. Notice this.
Who cares about the term friends when you're talking about geopolitics? It's nonsense.
Throughout the years, even in Soviet times, even in the 70s, in the 60s, in the 80s, 90s, the 2000s, whether it's Putin or Brezhnev or Gorbachev or Andropov or Yeltsin, Russia has never, not a single Russian leader in the past 50 years has said that that Russia does not want to be friends with America.
And that America is an enemy.
Never. No. Because in reality, Moscow wants to have a good relationship with America. Moscow doesn't want to have a confrontational relationship with Washington. A confrontation with Washington brings nothing good to Russia.
Or to the U.S. ultimately,
exactly,
I would say.
Or to the United States. And one caveat to what Mark had said about the repatriation of resources of capital from Great Britain back to Russia. Of course, some resources are going to be repatriated to Russia or to other markets. But the British, throughout the last several decades, have shown themselves to be thieves. The British establishment, yes. They knew very well who is investing those resources, who is putting that money in those banks. They knew it when those accounts were opened. They knew it when those investments of billions of dollars were made. They knew
They wrote about it in their newspapers.
Yes. So it was not a surprise to them.
Not a mystery.
But now what they're going to do, they're not just going to allow all of it to be repatriated back to Russia. What they're going to do is they're going to seize these resources, and who knows how they're going to use them, because we already have from the experience with Libya and with Iraq, we know that billions of dollars that were in these accounts have simply disappeared.
It's an amazing racket. Hang on, let me get Dima the last 20 seconds of this part.
I think, their calculation that there would be a split in the Russian elite is wrong, and their calculation that the Russian poor people will rebel against their rich is also wrong. Nope. And let me just remind everyone, every time when people try to confiscate all the property from the rich people in the UK, in Russia, it never made poor people happier. It never produced affluent countries.
On that point there, many thanks to my guests here in Moscow. This is the end of our broadcast segment. Stay with us for the extended version on our YouTube channel. See you next time, and remember, CrossTalk rules. Now for the extended version of our program, where we have political potpourri. Victor, what's on your mind?
So the Department of Homeland Security is apparently getting a new system which will allow it to compile information on American media outlets, on journalists who write on different topics from international affairs to domestic policy.
They're described as influencers. Influencer.
Exactly. And even if you and there is space for more than 250,000 in this database that they're creating.
News outlets.
News outlets and journalists. So even if you write for a little newspaper in Cleveland or somewhere in Minnesota or Oklahoma, you may end up in that database. 250,000. What does that tell us about the state of American democracy? What does that tell us about the future of the American Bill of Rights? The Department of Homeland Security is going to actually get it.
I thought that department was supposed to protect the homeland.
From Americans.
Well, I guess from the truth, too.
I mean,
I've always said the national security state is designed not to seek out and destroy potential terrorists. No, because they don't. But they spy on us. Well, and they watch people that could be of a threat to their system.
Exactly.
They're not, and it's because people that think freely and dissent, they're the biggest threats to the status quo.
It's been pointed out many times, and it's been written about in dozens of academic populations, that the terrorism powers granted with the Patriot Act and this formation of the Homeland Security Department have been used many more times against protesters and political dissent in the United States than they have against any actual terrorists. And that just says it right there.
Well, I would like to move to a slightly different part of the globe. In Brazil, Lula da Silva, the most popular potential candidate for the presidential election scheduled for October 2018, was basically forced to go to prison for 12 years, despite the fact that a huge majority of the population is against that, and that he would be the likeliest winner if he was allowed to run.
It's pretty interesting, these former
against
South American politicians, when they fall out of favor with Washington, they end up in prison or their careers are destroyed.
Yanukovych was so corrupt. Yanukovych was so corrupt. The EU had to apologize to him and to his prime minister. They have been looking for his assets in the EU for 3 years, and the EU court ruled that the Ukrainian government and the European authorities had to apologize to Mr. Azarov, the prime minister, because they didn't find anything.
Oh, it's like weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Mr. Poroshenko, it transpired that the new president, Mr. Poroshenko, had some assets with Misha Fonseca, in Panama. The Panamanian papers have revealed Mr. Poroshenko to be a beneficiary, but that doesn't matter. And now Nikki Haley has said the truth in the Duke's University a few days ago, when she said Russia was never going to be our friend. She also said, we armed Ukraine. And this is not the last act that you are going to see from this administration against Russia. Well, she said the truth.
Well, accidentally then.
There was an interview this week on RT Spanish by Rafael Correa, the former leftist president of Ecuador, and he interviewed Cristina Kirchner, the former leftist president of Argentina, which of course they also discussed Lula, the former leftist president of Brazil. Notice a pattern here.
Yes.
And they asked themselves the question, how did we let neoliberalism, and it must be said, the United States win? Yeah. And I think everyone should watch it. I think it's painful at times to listen to it. But
the irony is, and I'm older than most people that probably even watch this program, but I can remember Washington imploring upon the military dictatorships of South America to embrace democracy. But when democracy is embraced, people vote the wrong way. And then you have to undermine democracy.
When Washington was imploring them to embrace democracy, it was at the same time Washington was writing up those torture manuals for the School of Americas that were used in Guatemala and in other parts of Latin America. In Chile and in other parts of Latin America. In fact, very soon there is an election, a presidential election coming up in Mexico. And the leftist candidate has a good chance of winning. And we will see where the relationship between Washington and Mexico City will go from there. Also, a little note about leftist and rightist. When we talk about Latin America, what really concerns Washington is not the exact political leanings of the president or the prime minister, whether they're leftist or rightist, whether they're red or white or whatever. They care about whether they are willing to kowtow to the Washington's line. If they're rightist and they don't like to do what Washington says, Washington will act against them. If they're leftist, they will do the same thing.
Let me give an example. Exactly. Hungary.
The Monroe Doctrine is alive and well, isn't it?
In Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orban, demonized by the EU for many years, has won the election with a landslide. And what was the reaction of the...
I wonder who was meddling
of the Euro News. This is a victory for Putin. We are now going to see Orban and Putin increase their influence in Europe.
The real person who was meddling there was Soros.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But also
in Albania too, the U.S. State Department was in league with Soros to meddle in Albanian
on the other hand, we can't forget that as we should shift to Syria, that the U.S. has supported the Marxist Kurdish YPG in Syria when it suited their interests as well. So as long as you follow or fall in line with U.S. foreign policy.
Give us a quick update with Syria.
Yeah. Trump said in the last 2 weeks that the U.S. needed to get out of Syria. We need to get back to our own country where we belong, let the other people handle it. Until Mohammed bin Salman, the brat prince of the Wahhabist dictatorship of Saudi Arabia, visited the U.S. on a goodwill tour and said that the United States
Wahhabist on a goodwill tour. Can't deal with that phrase.
We cannot allow the U.S. to give up their checkpoint in Syria, supposedly interfering in between Iran, Tehran, and Damascus. The U.S. must stay medium term, if not long term,
we have
in
to
Syria.
point out to our viewers that the United States is in Syria illegally under international law.
So Trump followed that up by a comment. Well, we could stay in Syria if Saudi Arabia pays for it. Now, I want to explain to you, as a former U.S. military member, what the U.S. president just pimped out the U.S. military as mercenaries to the Wahhabist dictatorship of Saudi Arabia to back theirs, and it must be said, Israel's interests in Syria. And if American boys and girls start dying in numbers in Syria and your tax dollars are wasted, it is for Mohammed bin Salman.
Well, it's interesting. Mohammed bin Salman said it, that the United States should stay in Syria. That's his order.
Wow, he has a lot. What right does he have to say that? Okay.
Almost on the same day, President Trump has said, we've got nothing from our $7 trillion that we spent in the Middle East in the last 17 years. So, we will be getting out of there very soon, very soon. Well, whose truth will prevail? Who rules the United States, Mohammed bin Salman or the elected President Trump?
And that's why I brought this up last week. This is why I brought it up, because I think it's so important here. Trump says the U.S. is getting out of Syria, but the facts on the ground and every...
Mohammed bin Salman doesn't say it, so they will say it.
What is important here is that does what the President of the United States have to say on any particular issue have any meaning anymore? Okay, we have North Korea, the negotiations there. I'm sure we're going to talk about the nuclear deal. It's going to probably, the U.S. will pull out in May. But do we count on his words, or has he just completely surrendered to the deep state?
His words are not worth much at all.
Well, one more example.
I have to agree.
Mr. Trump promised that we will be getting along very well with Russia. Now, 60 diplomats out of the United States because something happened in Salisbury which they can't even explain.
Or didn't happen.
Or didn't happen at all. So basically, you see how the United States is run rather by Mohammed bin Salman than by the elected president. And they call it a system of checks and balances.
Checks and balances. Donald Trump, the elected president of the United States, Saudis with some
billions.
$200 to $300 billion of weapons purchases from the U.S. between Obama's and Trump's presidency. Money talks.
Yeah.
Mohammed bin Salman is certainly heavier in this juxtaposition.
All right, gentlemen, that's all we have time for this segment. This has been our extended version of Bullhorns. We hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week. Remember, crosstalk rules.
And slap a Russian.